Good evening, everybody. We want to welcome you here. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome Octavia Sargent of St. James United Methodist Church to lead us in our invocation.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, Mayor Lockwood, fellow city council members in the city of Milton, you guys at home. It's an honor to be able to be here in time just for Lent and the beginning of spring and the time for cleansing and forgiveness, restoration, and growth. It's an honor to speak at our last meeting here in this building. Woohoo! We are moving in a couple of days. So if you don't mind, if I could have everyone bow with me, clear your hearts and minds as I pray. Heavenly Father, we come united today, one voice, one heart, one color, one mind, one body. I offer the prayer of Ephesians, a community built of different ethnic and religious beliefs united together for the greater good of all people. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with the power through his Spirit and inner being, so that the Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Lord God, I thank you for all you have blessed us with. I ask that you continue to lead and guide us in the directions you set forth. Let your will be done. I pray for the Mayor Lockwood, the City Council members, the City of Milton Law Enforcement and Fire Department. Watch over them. Grant them the understanding, courage, and strength to lead and protect our community. We give you all the honor and the glory. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Milton City Council for today, March 6, 2017, to order. City, if you'll please call the roll and make general announcements.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll be happy to call roll for the March 6th, 2017 regular meeting. I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Those attending the meeting who would like to provide public comment, either during the public hearing or during the call for public comment, you are required to complete a public comment card prior to speaking on the item. There is no public comment for consent agenda items or items under first presentation. Those called to speak will be taken in the order that the speaker cards are received by the city clerk prior to the beginning of tonight's meeting. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization. The city council may allow public comment on either an agenda item or general public comment from a representative of such an organized group or association, provided that the individual has filed a notarized affidavit that they have the authority to speak on behalf of said organization on a form provided by the city clerk prior to the agenda item being called. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited, so please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outbursts, or dialogue with any person speaking. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. As I call roll this evening, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Joe Lockwood.
Here.
Councilmember Karen Thurman.
Here.
Councilmember Matt Kuntz.
Here.
Councilmember Bill Lusk.
Here.
Councilmember Bert Hewitt.
Here.
Councilmember Rick Morick.
Here.
And for the record, Councilmember Joe Longoria is absent. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Again, good evening. I want to welcome everybody here. And this is kind of a bittersweet meeting here tonight. You're here along with the rest of us for the last city council meeting in this building. So starting next the 13th, we'll have our first meeting in your new city hall, and I encourage and welcome everybody to come check it out. I think you'll be very pleased, very proud, and you'll have technology's a lot more upgraded. You won't have screens in front of you here, and you won't have screens with projectors there. You'll be able to see a whole lot more, and cameras, and keep everything taped and all that. So, I know myself, and I'm sure the council are very proud of what our whole team and staff have done, and the team of architects and contractors. And I truly believe when the citizens walk in, you're going to say, wow. And it's not because, I was telling somebody earlier, it's not wow because it's really fancy like some city halls and whatnot, but wow, just the feel. It's just got a good user-friendly feel. It's kind of low-key like Milton, but it's cutting edge. So look forward to our next meeting there, and you guys being there. So, Sudie, if you'll please call our first item.
Our first item is approval of the meeting agenda. This is agenda item number 17057.
Okay, I would like to change. We've got a couple of committee members on, so I'd like to move those up to put those up to the front. Is there anything else on the agenda that anybody needs? Rick?
Yeah, if I could add, it wasn't in the original agenda, but if I could add a resolution nominating someone for the Milton Equestrian Committee, District 3 and Post 2.
Okay, yep, got that. Okay. All right, if none, do I have a motion on the agenda?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as modified.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion approval. Councilmember Hewitt, second. Councilmember Thurman. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimous. Sudie, do we have any public comment tonight?
We do not, sir.
Okay. Move on to the consent agenda. Sudie, if you'll please call those items.
First item is approval of the February 22nd, 2017 regular city council meeting minutes. Agenda item number 17058. Approval of a professional services agreement between the City of Milton and Atlanta Office Movers, doing business as Peachtree Movers. Agenda item number 17059. Approval of an agreement between the City of Milton and A1A Let's Get Tropical, LLC, for performance at Beach Bash at Bell Memorial Park on June 24th, 2017. Agenda item number 17060. Our fourth consent agenda item, approval of an agreement between the City of Milton and the American Flyers Show Band for performance at Party on the Plaza, April 29th, 2017. Agenda item number 17061. Next, approval of an agreement between the City of Milton and Cooper Carey, Inc. to provide conceptual design services for the proposed court fire police facility on Highway 9, agenda item number 17062. Next, item number 6 is approval of an agreement between the City of Milton and NGL, an erosion control group, LLC, to provide right-of-way mowing services. Agenda item number 17063. Next, approval of a professional services agreement between the City of Milton and Buxton Company. Agenda item number 17064. Our eighth and final consent agenda item this evening is approval of an agreement between the City of Milton and Intercontinental Commercial Services, Inc. to provide janitorial services for various city facilities. Agenda item number 17065.
Mayor, I'll move to approve the consent agenda as prepared by staff.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Luss, second by Councilmember Kuntz for approval. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay. Sudie, if we can move on to the new business items that we changed with our changing the agenda.
This item is consideration of a resolution appointing a member to the City of Milton Board of Zoning Appeals for District 1, Post 1. Agenda item number 17069.
Okay, I'll turn that over to Councilmember Thurman.
Thank you. I would like to appoint G10 Patel, who goes by the name of Hodge, for the Board of Zoning Appeals. He moved to Milton in 2003 from South Bend, Indiana. He is currently president of the Waterside Homeowners Association, and through that role has actively participated in various focus groups hosted by the City of Milton, such as the Downtown Milton Placemaking Initiative. Professionally, he is an accounting asset manager for the real estate firm Carter & Associates, where he oversees financial reporting and operational activities. And prior to joining Carter, he worked for Governorstown Club Development, a real estate development company focused primarily on master plan residential developments with golf course and resort style amenities. He is a licensed real estate broker in Georgia and Indiana, and he has over 22 years of experience in the real estate industry, so I think he's well qualified for the BZA. He's married to Mayora Patel, and they have a 12-year-old son, Devin, that attends Northwestern Middle School. In his spare time, he enjoys traveling and playing golf.
Okay. I will open up for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve Haj Patel for the BZA, and anybody that came from South Bend, Indiana, I'm definitely in favor of. So
I figured you would like that.
Second.
The motion.
All right, have a motion from Councilmember Kuntz, a second, I believe, Councilmember Lusk. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay? And we could go ahead and swear Mr. Patel in. Thank you very much, and we'll swear Mr. Patel in now, and then after that, then everyone can swear at you. You don't mind raising your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear and affirm
solemnly swear and affirm
that I will faithfully perform the duties of
that I will faithfully perform the duties of
the Board of Zoning Appeals member
the Board of Zoning Appeals member
of the city,
of the city,
and that I will support and defend the charter thereof,
and I will support and defend the charter thereof,
as well as the Constitution
as well as the Constitution
and of the state of Georgia, the laws of the state of Georgia,
and the laws of the state of Georgia
and of the United States of
and
America.
of the United States of America.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. And we, as I always say, it's our volunteers and, folks that really care about our communities, what makes Milton great. So we sincerely,
I'm looking forward for the opportunity to get back to my community.
good. We appreciate you stepping up. Does the council want to join me and take a picture? Stand over here. How about we just move over? Yeah. Barry, you guys don't have to do that.
Put you in the center.
Okay, Sudie, if you'd please call the next item.
The next item is consideration of a resolution appointing a member to the City of Milton Equestrian Committee
Okay,
for District 3, Post 2.
I'll turn that over to Councilmember Morgan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's my pleasure to nominate Larry Covington to District 3, Post 2 of the Milton Equestrian Committee. Larry is a native Atlantan, born in Atlanta, and he moved to Forsyth County back in 1957, and his parents moved to Alpharetta in 1963. He graduated from Berry College in Rome, Georgia, where he met and married his wife, Nadine Naismith, from Milledgeville, Georgia, and they've been married 49 years. After graduating from college, he moved back to Alpharetta, where they had their first home in downtown Alpharetta. And in 1975, he moved out to what is now Milton, and they built their first home on the 8 acres that they currently own. In 2010, he replaced that home, built their second home. So they've lived at the same site in Milton for 42 years and have been in the Alpharetta and Milton area for 59 and a half years. They have 3 children. They're all married and live in the metro Atlanta area. They have 7 grandchildren ranging in age from 5 to 25. Bless you. Both Nadine and Larry were raised on farms where they had horses as pets and for trail riding. And just a little humorous aside, Nadine's father promised to buy her a horse, but the condition was that she wouldn't marry Larry. Well, Larry won out, so he felt obligated. So in the first year of marriage, he bought a house or a horse for his wife. And he also wanted me to clarify that him and his father-in-law did become best friends after that. They currently own 3 horses, 1 Shetland pony, a miniature donkey, which I've seen, 2 barn cats, 3 rabbits, and 13 chickens for laying eggs. He was a accountant by trade. He started out 17 years with Williams Contracting. Then he had 3 years of owning his own accounting firm, and 9 years as a CFO of Computer Transport, and then he started his own logistics business, Dedicated Logistics LLC, and he sold it after 12 years, building it into a national company with offices from San Francisco to Pittsburgh. Larry currently is working in his retirement as a trustee for 3 trust funds in real estate, and I'd like to nominate Larry. Both him and his wife have been involved with horses since their youngest days, and I think he'd be a great addition to the committee.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve Larry Covington from District 3, Post 2 to the Milton Equestrian Committee.
Second.
Okay, got a motion from Councilmember Kuntz, second from Councilmember Thurman. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. And Mr. Covington, if you'll step forward, we'll swear you in. All right, if you'll raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear and affirm
solemnly swear and affirm
that I will faithfully perform the duties of
that I will faithfully perform the duties of
the Milton Equestrian Committee
the Milton Equestrian Committee
of the city,
of the city,
and that I will support and defend the charter thereof,
and that I will support and defend the charter thereof,
as well as the Constitution
as well as the Constitution
and the laws of the state of Georgia
and the laws of the state of
and
Georgia
of the United States.
and of the United
All
States.
right. Thank you, Larry. We appreciate that. And the council will join me. This sign right here. And again, like I said a minute ago, I appreciate you helping out, stepping up, and getting involved. Scoot in over here. Come on over here. Let me on this side of the. My butt looks big on that side.
Yeah, turn sideways.
Again, thank you to not only our newest volunteers, but our existing ones. All right, our next item is reports and presentations. Sudi, if you'll please sound the first item.
This item is presentation of a grant by the Milton First Responders Foundation to the Milton Police Department for specialized tactical equipment. Mr. Brian Dolan.
Good evening, City Council members, Mayor Lockwood. Good evening. Just want to take a few moments really to recognize another fabulous family in the City of Milton supporting our first responders. Wanted to recognize Mr. and Mrs. Ringwald, who are in the audience today, with a generous donation to Milton First Responders Foundation that is over $5,000. That is going to allow us, and already has allowed us, to buy tactical gear for our first responders, police officers here in Milton. A tremendous donation. We're so pleased to have the Ringwalds here, along we have some family members here as well. Raise your hands.
Can we get a hand for?
Yeah. If it pleases for a few moments, I would like to have Mr. Ringwald come up and just to explain why the donation for Milton First Responders.
Super. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, council members. Just if you'll indulge me in a story for a moment, I think it'll be refreshing to the group and rewarding. Cindy and I own two businesses here in Milton, and we've enjoyed running a healthcare IT practice called L7 Technology Partners for a number of years, and benefited from everything that Milton provides us in the way of lifestyle and a place to raise our kids. One of whom, or now two of whom, with his new wife, Katie, are here tonight to be with us. But also, we're part of the Rotary organization, Rotary of Milton Windward, and it was through the Rotary organization that we got to know the Milton First Responders Group. And during the annual golf event that we use as a fundraiser for that organization, which I'd love to invite all of you to attend, we met Officer Era Baronian. I knew there he is over there. And he ended up winning what was a day on the lake, basically, with our family on our boat, and we got to know Officer Baronian through that endeavor as a result of a raffle. Well, as it turns out, I have another family member, my daughter Kristen, who is also going into the military. Ron is a pilot for the Navy, and Kristen is going to be a surface warfare officer in the Navy. And she needed some shooting lessons. So I heard that he actually is the firearms instructor for the Milton PD, and said, well, maybe you know somebody who might be available to help her with that. I've done my best with her to get her prepared for what she's about to do as an officer in the Navy, but maybe you know somebody else who could help. He goes, well, I can help. I said, well, no, really. I mean, I'm sure you're a busy guy. You have a full-time job and all this. He's like, no, it's not a problem. I'll help. When do you want to do this? Day, night, weekend? Doesn't matter to me. I'll help. I said, oh, okay. Let's try this out. So we organized some time with Officer Baronian. We went down to the range, and I got to tell you, he's a phenomenal instructor. I've seen a lot of firearms instructors in my days. He is top-notch. I don't know where the chief is, but he's really good. Started from the ground up, stance, position, everything there is to it. And at the end of that, I said, well, what can I give you for your time? He goes, well, let me tell you right now, don't ever ask me that question. There's I'm not going to charge you anything. And I said, well, there's got to be something we can do. And he said, no. I said, well, we really needed to take this a few more steps. And he said, well, you name the time and place, I'll be there. It doesn't matter. So we organized a couple of more training sessions, and again, I asked him, what can I do for you? He said, nothing, and don't ask. So there's got to be something. And it was actually after that day on the lake that we met Claudine and got to know the Milton First Responders organization. And he said, well, maybe you can do something through them. Well, back to where I started, we had a very successful year here last year at L7 Technology Partners, and we were blessed with a couple of those bluebird deals that you see once in a while that come along, and a surplus of revenue, and we said, well, maybe we can do something for the city and do something in honor of Officer Baronian and his heart of service, not just to protect, but also to protect and to serve the citizens of the community. And so Cindy and I got together, figured out what we could do through the Milton First Responders organization for the City of Milton and the Police Department, and this is where we are. I hope this is only part of what you got for that. But anyway, Officer Baronian, thank you so much for all that you do to protect and to serve our community. And Chief, thank you for not only Officer Baronian, but your whole team. We've certainly appreciated the protection that you provide all of us here. And thank you for your service. And we all believe Blue Lives Matter, and we're behind you all the way. So thank you, sir.
It's going to be a lot of folks.
Good. That's always good.
Before you speak, let me just say a couple words too, and this comes from the heart and genuinely, and I know the council, our staff, especially our citizens, just everything that you guys have alluded to for us. I mean, I can't say it enough that we all know you get up every morning and put us in front of your own life, and you're willing to get out there and protect us and do whatever it takes. And I just want to take this opportunity to make sure that, we all sincerely appreciate that. Every one of our citizens, it makes me proud. It's hard to even imagine. So a big heartfelt thank you. Also, right behind you, our first responders, what they're doing to help support you guys is right there behind us. So thank you guys so much. Eric, Cindy, thank you for your generous donation, and it means a lot to our city. So thank you all for it.
As long as the ring walls are still here, I'd like to make special note that yesterday was 150th anniversary of the formation of the U.S. Navy Civil Engineering Corps, and it was also the 75th anniversary of the formation of the U.S. Naval Mobile Construction Battalions, known as the Seabees. So, happy anniversary.
Again, thank you guys very much. It's an honor to call you citizens. All right. Cindy, let's move on to our first presentation. If you'll please call those items.
First item is consideration of an ordinance of the City of Milton, Georgia, to amend Chapter 4 of the Code of the City of Milton, Georgia, to amend the requirements for the issuance of alcoholic beverage license, to provide for the repeal of conflicting ordinances, to provide an effective date, and for other lawful purposes. Agenda item number 17066. Next, consideration of an amendment to Chapter 2, Article 6, Financial Management Program, to provide for necessary updates and revisions. Agenda item number 17067. Our final first presentation item is consideration of an ordinance creating the Milton Green Space Advisory Committee. Agenda item number 17068.
Okay, do you have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Presentation.
I make a motion that we approve the first presentation as read.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Morick, a second from Councilmember Thurman. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay, we don't have any items under a public hearing, so we can move on to our zoning agenda. Sudi, if you'll please sound the item.
This is consideration of RZ 1605 to create steep slope standards in Chapter 64, Article 17, Division 3, Site Improvement Standards. Agenda item number 17009. First presentation was at the January 9th regular City Council meeting. This was discussed at the January 18th Council work session and deferred at the January 30th City Council meeting. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. If you'll remember, we deferred this particular ordinance to go back to Planning Commission to have some discussion on the ridgeline component of it that they would like to have included in this particular ordinance. And so tonight I'm going to focus primarily on that ridgeline component that we went over with Planning Commission. If you have any questions on any other components of the ordinance, please feel free to ask those. But since we've had a first reading on this already, if you choose to adopt this tonight, it would be adopted with the revisions that we're discussing tonight. First and foremost was the modification of the title of the ordinance. Rather than just steep slopes, it would be a steep slopes and ridgeline protection ordinance. And if I can get working. So one of the concerns that we had with the way the ridge lines were originally defined in the ordinance that the Planning Commission brought forward was that the model ordinance that we took this from really dealt with ridge lines that were really a prominent component of the community. And so where you could see a ridge line throughout the community and controlling development along that ridge line, which is not necessarily what we have in many cases of the city of Milton. The way the ordinance was structured, it required your roof line to be within 2 feet of the top of the ridge line, which if you had a number of ridge lines throughout the community or large prominent ridge lines, that wasn't necessarily an issue. Our concern with the administration of that particular component was that we have more of a rolling topography here where you may have one main ridge line throughout the property and a lot of smaller ridge lines. And most of these slides should look relatively familiar. This was a rehash of what we did at the work session not too long ago. I mean, our concern is that we could have ridge lines the way it was defined in which you could not physically get a structure's roof within 2 feet of that ridge line. And so we didn't want to have the possibility of that being interpreted as that area being totally undevelopable, because I don't believe that that was the intent either of the model ordinance or what Planning Commission had recommended. But we wanted to go back and try and clarify some of that language to reflect more of what we see throughout our community. This was just an example that we went over at the work session, where this is actually the piece of property right next to us. And if you looked at all the little red lines that are on that drawing, they technically would have been ridge lines that would have been protected under that ordinance and not necessarily something that I think was the intent of the Planning Commission. So what we tried to do is, if you look at this, this is actually a digital elevation model of the city, where the lighter colors represent the high elevations, the darker colors represent the valleys. And so you can see that for us, for the predominant development along our ridge lines, our main roads run along those ridge lines. And so rather than looking up at a lot of prominent ridge lines throughout the community, the majority of our roads run along those ridge lines. So what we wanted to do, and having some discussions with the Planning Commission, the intent was really to try and protect the view shed as you drive through the city of Milton. So similar to our view shed protection, they wanted to maintain those ridge lines which were readily visible to the general public as you move throughout the community. And so what we looked at was what are those areas that have some prominence as you drive down the road, and we established those areas to be those that are higher than 50 feet of the exterior roads and within 500 feet of the right-of-way. And so we modified our ordinance to read to the extent we still had the 2 feet for the roof line above a primary ridge line, or it could be shielded from view. So that gave some opportunity for development along that ridge line, provided it shielded from view. And I'll show some examples of that a little bit further in the presentation. We didn't want to exclude the development along those ridge lines because this ordinance will be done in conjunction with the steep slopes ordinance, and it's all as one. And if you remember, the steep slope ordinance requires you to find an area of at least 25% or flatter for your building envelope. And so in many cases, that's going to be along these ridge lines within the development. And so we wanted to provide some opportunity to allow development in those areas where we think it's actually going to be necessary to develop. And so what we wanted to do with that digital elevation model was then look at those areas throughout the city where we thought this may come into play. And so what you see on this is the black lines represent the 500 foot on either side of the road, so a 1,000-foot wide corridor along our main roads. The green areas represent areas where the criteria of 50 feet above that road elevation and within our 500-foot zone may exist. So it gives you an idea about the distribution of these ridge lines throughout the city. We then went in and looked at those areas in a little bit more detail. So if you were to look at this area near Providence and Freemanville, again, you can see that the light areas represent the highest ridge lines along this area, and the dark areas represent the streams, the valleys, the lower areas in this particular corridor. When we started to break that down, all those green areas turned into these areas. So the areas outlined in red would be those areas in this particular zone that would meet our criteria of being 50 feet or more of elevation from the roadway and within our 500-foot corridor. So again, that was our definition of the primary ridge lines. Those were the areas that we felt were important to protect, that met the Planning Commission's intent, and so we've modified the ordinance accordingly. And so one of the options was to shield or screen the types of development along the ridgeline. So here's just a couple of examples of what we're talking about. It could either be vegetative cover, and in the case where existing vegetation exists to the extent that it can provide that screening, you'll see that non-invasive vegetation exists that shall be maintained and incorporated into the screening to the greatest extent practical. So the idea was there that where that existing vegetation existed, it be utilized in that screening, so we're not just stripping those ridge lines down. The buildings can be moved back, they can be flattened. There's a number of different alternatives that would allow that type of development along the ridge lines and still protect that viewshed corridor along our main roadways. And then the applicability section, we revised the applicability section so that this particular ordinance related to the primary ridge lines in addition to the steep slopes areas that we've discussed previously. And so that's it. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. If you'd like to have some discussion on the steep slopes, I have some information on that too.
Okay. Bill?
In your definitions, Carter, I think you define a ridge line is the line or the intersection of two slopes. And I'm not sure, I recognize that situation up in the Appalachians, the Smokies, where you may have a ridge or the top of the ridge that's only 2 or 3 feet wide. So you, in effect, get that intersection of the two slopes. But down here, we're in the Piedmont area where they're rolling hills here. So you may get an intersection of those slopes, but it may be 30 feet above the surface of the top of the hill, so to speak. So you really don't get a ridge, you get a rolling topography. So I'm not sure that ridge lines really apply to this area of the country. Particularly the southeast.
Right. It's not where we would see a traditional ridge line, and in a lot of cases you see these ordinances above a certain elevation. So they're trying to protect elevations, ridge lines above 2,500, 3,500 feet, where you have that more traditional ridge line that you would think of in the mountains.
Right.
And that was really kind of the challenge in defining an area that we felt like should be protected to maintain really to maintain that kind of view shed that the Planning Commission was interested in. And so while you're right, we don't have a traditional type ridge line that you would expect in this type of ordinance, those rolling type elevations and those rolling type hills, where they meet the criteria of 50 feet above the adjoining road and within our corridor, we felt like we could protect and maintain that view shed to some degree.
And you've really minimized it in this second or third slide that you've come up with. Now, are those slides, particularly where you identify what you call a ridge line, part of this ordinance?
No. So those slides were really just to give us an indication of whether or not the criteria we were selecting was reasonable, and to give you an idea about where the distribution of those areas would be. The final determination on any of these ridge lines would be done based on the survey provided by each project on a case-by-case basis. So that really was just a starting point for us to see where these particular areas might occur throughout the city.
Let me think about this.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you're thinking, because I certainly understand this. And Carter, I think you even said, when you're 3,500 feet elevation more, and Councilmember Luss brought up, up in the Appalachian Mountains and all, but I'm just trying to, how does this affect, when you look around Milton, and, how does this affect it positively, but also negatively for, say somebody has a lot that they're going to build their house on. Do we have any kind of feel on how much area is going to be affected, how many people would be affected positively or negatively?
I don't have a lot count. And so while it wouldn't necessarily prohibit development on the ridge lines, it protects the development along the ridge lines and regulates it to some degree. And so, the impact of it, I guess, is going to be, everybody's opinion is going to be a little bit different on that. But I don't have a specific lot count on how many lots are affected by this.
And kind of the reason I ask, obviously you can tell when you're up in the mountains, you can tell the areas that have this protection and not. It
That's
makes
right.
a big difference. I noticed, as we're talking, Milton's mainly gentle slopes and rolling hills. A lot of lots, and even, we talk about we want to develop large lots and low density, but a lot of, I'll use my house, for example. We wanted to build our house in the middle of the best view and all that. So I would think that there probably are, a lot of lots that maybe somebody wants to do a big lot, but what makes the most sense is on the ridge line. So how would that affect?
Well, I think most of what we found in the areas that we were looking at is hilltops as opposed to ridge lines. And so it would, in some cases, force you to either bring the house and structure down the slope to comply with the 2 feet above the hilltop or ridge line, or it may require you to take it to the back side of the slope or screen it in some way.
And again, the reason I just keep asking is when you think about what I believe our citizens in Milton want and the equestrian logo and whatnot, and you drive by and you see a pasture and a barn over here and maybe a house sitting back up here, which would probably be on top of the hilltop, whereas
Right.
You move it down to quote protect the ridge line, but is that really does that fit what I believe our citizens want the look of Milton? I'm just throwing that out there.
Right, and I think from our evaluation, most of the impact would be in the immediate vicinity of that ridge line, and what you see from that corridor in front of the ridge line. I don't see, or we did not see, areas where you were going to protect something on Freemanville and have that visual effect on Hopewell Road kind of thing. There's too much topography between our roads and too much existing vegetation to have those long vistas and view sheds that you might traditionally see with a typical ridgeline protection ordinance.
Council Bill and then Mayor.
I go back to the term ridge line, and I think as it's being used in this document here, it's contrary to the definition of a ridge line. It is not what we see around this area. Repeat myself, in the Piedmont, you really don't get an intersection of two joining slopes. So
the slopes, well, right. So in the traditional ridge line, like we all think about, you've got two slopes that kind of meet at the pinnacle. In this case, you've got two slopes that come out and then flatten basically to zero as they come together.
Sure.
So you do, but not in the traditional sense. You're absolutely right. That it's more of a rolling terrain than that sharp peaked ridge line that you might see up in the mountains.
what you're ending up with is actually an arc
That's right.
between those two tangents.
That's right.
So-
Exactly right.
Matt, I think you're. Karen?
My fear is that in order to comply with this ordinance, they're going to be in conflict with other ordinances that we may have that require houses to be within a certain distance of the road and everything else. Are we just getting ourselves into a thing that is making it difficult for someone to build on certain lots because they can't go down the hill, they have to be up the hill, but yet they have to go down the hill for this new steep slope ordinance? I mean, are we just getting ourselves into a situation where it's going to be a difficult time for staff just to try to figure out how to put a house on which of the ordinances they're going to be in conflict with the least?
Well, the ordinance does provide for an appeals process through the Board of Zoning Appeals. So if we come upon a lot that has particular difficulty in development, there is an avenue for them to go through the Board of Zoning Appeals and seek relief. But as with any of the ordinances, particularly this one and the steep slopes component of it, it will take staff time to go through individual developments with the property owners to try and work through some of these issues. How many of those exist, I honestly don't know, and sometimes you don't know until you begin the implementation of these. But we believe that this ordinance does kind of meet what the intent of the Planning Commission was hoping to present. And
Well, the BZA is really only supposed to approve variances that there is a hardship. And I'm assuming
right.
this would qualify as a hardship for a lot of those things, because a lot of the lots, simply because this ordinance would be a new ordinance. This ordinance would not have been around when people originally purchased their property. Is that correct?
right, and particularly the steep slopes component of it, this doesn't necessarily preclude you from developing on an existing lot. What it does is regulates the subdivision of those lots. So if you have an existing lot out there, the steep slopes ordinance, or that component of it, allowed you to have a building permit on that lot. If you wanted to subdivide that lot, that's where these regulations would come into effect. And whether you subdivided that lot into 2 lots or 50 lots, this ordinance would come into play at that time.
I guess my concern is, and all the time ordinances sound good on paper, but then as staff knows, and probably some of the council and I know, what I do, what I run into is you get the cases where it really works against what you're trying to do. And, a good example may be somebody that, is going to subdivide a parcel. I'm just making something up, but 2 5-acre lots or 1 10-acre lot or whatever, but where the home site sets perfectly and whatnot, whereas if we have an ordinance and it can't, then it may induce them to say, well, that takes this prime home site out, so we're going to do 3 or 4 lots instead, because if we're moving them down the hill. So, and the concern, I like the fact that it could go to the BZA, but to Karen's point, if that is a hardship, it's not necessarily a hardship, it's more of a common sense judgment. Where does the home site look better from the street? Where does it look better for the, the homeowners and whatnot? So I don't really see that as a BZA, a cut and dry thing. That's kind of my concern. Bill and then Karen.
Back to Karen's point, along a roadway where you would get differences in slope, I guess, and there's undevelopable land there. So by using this guide ordinance here, you could end up with different setbacks amongst a row of houses down along a right-of-way. So I'm wondering, and going back to the point that the mayor brought up here, it could work against you. It could work against the aesthetics, I guess, of the layout of homes along a certain what you'd call ridge line or 500-foot corridor like that. So I think we may be introducing more issues out there by adopting this, then going in front of BZA, and it's we're creating hardships out there by adopting this part of the ordinance, if that makes sense.
And again, I'll take that one step further, just unintended consequences by altering something. It may, give us not the desired effect that we think we want. Karen?
Is there a way for there to be an administrative appeal of this if it's not in the best interest of the community as a whole, rather than having to go before the BZA and be a hardship situation, that the director could handle a certain amount of appeals for this?
Yeah, I think I can answer that one. The answer is of course. Of course, it can be structured however the council wants to structure it. I mean, these are not zoning issues; these are subdivision administrative issues. And so, if the council wants to set up a situation where administrative relief can be provided, you can do that. Subject, of course, to the overriding issue is how much discretion do you want to give staff? And I don't mean that in a diminutive way to staff. How much does staff want? I mean, at some point, because then, of course, they run the risk of making decisions that are perhaps inconsistent with the will of the council. So, the answer, Councilmember Thurman, is of course we could craft an administrative appeal or administrative variance sort of internal process for these. But the trick is always in those sorts of things is you said it best. If staff makes a determination that perhaps a strict interpretation of this ordinance is not in the best interest of the public, that's a tough one for staff to make. I hope everybody can understand why. I mean, just sometimes that can be difficult for them to do. But your point is well taken. Yes, we can do that. I think if I'm staff, what they would say is please give me some guidance on what you'd be looking for from the standpoint then of when we should exercise that discretion and give that sort of relief. But yes, the answer is yes.
I think you got a good point because if you've got an ordinance here, but then you've also got an administrative way to handle it to make a different decision, well, where do you draw the line? Does that really negate the whole ordinance because staff has the ability to?
Well, I suspect the council member was thinking, I would know it when I saw it, when it no longer makes any sense for us to strictly apply it. I just, I'm not speaking for Ms. Field, but I'm sure she'd be like, but could you give me a little bit of, just put some meat in the bone of when you would want me to make that call? That's all.
Well, and I think that kind of gets to the heart of why we wanted to go back and have this discussion with the Planning Commission, because the way the ridge lines were defined before, almost every little ridge, like we saw on the example for the piece of property next to us, fell under that type of regulation. So we tried to define those primary ridge lines a little bit better to get to a point that we felt was probably more in line with what the Planning Commission was really wanting and hoping to protect along these corridors, and therefore get it really kind of out of the administrative type approval and more towards this is the ridge line that we want to protect.
Okay. Number one, I want to ask, do we have any public comment on this?
We do. We have one.
Okay, so certainly ask a question now, or I may want to go ahead and hear public comment on this, and then we close the hearing and we can continue to discuss it.
And that would be Mr. Scott Reese.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'm Scott Reese with Brumbelow Reese & Associates, doing business at 13685 Highway 9, Milton, Georgia, 30004. I've been asked by my family, relatives, and clients to speak on the steep slope ordinance. My personal and professional opinion is that the existing rules and regulations that we have in effect have controlled the development in a quality manner for the city of Milton for the past 10 years. I guess I got clarification. I was going to ask clarification if it's just for those of us that still own large tracts of land, and it was, my understanding is, yes. So, those of our friends that live in subdivided neighborhoods, they're exempt. Well, to me, if this ordinance is good for me, it's good for everyone. It should be the guy that's wanting to put a pool on his lot, and he has a 35% or 40% slope. he should be subject to the same rules and regulations to create this utopian environment that we are seeking to get, not just on those of us that have still held our property and we're going to now be penalized for that. So that clarification was gone through. I strongly disagree. If the ordinance is of quality and as the need and necessity is such to protect the quality of life of Milton, and it's that dire situation, then it needs to be everyone. They all need to participate, not just those of us that still have our farms and have not subdivided them yet. To follow up, if you feel the need to pass the ordinance, I ask that you change the percentage from 25% to 33 or 35%, more in line with the definition of critical slopes and areas that are considered to be at risk for erosion control. And I guess that is the main thing that we're fighting on a steep slope, is the fact that if you're grading on a steep slope, that we're trying to protect the environment and hold that in. So I think we should bring it more in line with the state where it is considered critical slopes that are being greater than 40%. I guess lastly, listening to this presentation, if we can identify the properties, and that's the way I took it, maybe I misunderstand, is that we now have identified the properties that will be affected. I think we should contact those property owners and those individuals and let them participate since we now have defined the areas and the properties such. And this could be a major effect on the use of their property. Lastly, it just seems like constantly those of us that still have large tracts of land are in a constant battle to protect our property rights on this. So with that in mind, I want to thank you for your consideration and to give us all the same protection under the law, just not those of us that own more than 5 acres. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So do we have any more public comment?
I do have
and
one.
I want to procedurally, I know it looks like we just had a public comment. If it's okay with the council to hear, it's fine with me. Typically our rules say before the item starts, but I think everybody good with that? Yep. Okay. All right.
And that's Miss Laura Bentley.
I wasn't picking on you, Ms. Bentley. I just want to make sure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Laura Bentley, 2500 Bethany Church Road. In response to this, I just wanted to make sure you remembered this whole steep slopes ordinance has traveled through the CZIM. I was in attendance at that CZIM. It was, I'm not sure, probably 5 to 10 people there in support of this. I own a piece of property with some steep slopes. I'm more interested in the way Milton looks in the future. As Carter pointed out, this seems like reasonable protection. We've done all this, the view shed protection. I think in general, most citizens are in favor of it. Thank you very much. Oh, and also, we don't have a steep slope. Most cities in this area do have this protection. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Sudie, do we have any more public comment?
That's all, sir.
Okay, we'll close the hearing and back to discussion. Any questions for Carter or any other staff or discussion? Bill?
Well, I think Mr. Reese brings up a good point there about the fact that we've identified those critical areas within the city. And I think it's only fair to notify these property owners that there are issues with it and get them engaged in this discussion rather than going ahead and adopting something that could lead to several either administrative variance changes or even in some cases maybe appeals to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So it's I think we've gone that far. down this path that we have recognized them, and I think it's only logical to take it another step further and advise these folks, just like we would in any change to zoning code or anything else that affects personal property uses or personal property rights.
Karen?
Have we actually identified this on a property-by-property basis, or just from a 40,000-foot view on the map? I know that one little area right there at Freemanville and Providence, you drilled down into, but have we drilled down into all areas of the city, or is that the only area?
For the detailed analysis, it was just in that one area of Freemanville and Providence. So for that level, just in that area. For that level, we've done that on a citywide basis. But if we were talking about notifying everyone who may be affected, I don't know that we wouldn't notify everybody within the corridor, the 1,000-foot corridor, because again, the final determination on what areas would fall under this regulation would be done on a case-by-case basis based on specific surveys for those properties, rather than 2-foot aerial topo. So we would just have to probably have a little bit more conversation on the right people to involve in that.
So that's not something you could just sit out and notice as the affected property owners without doing a good bit of additional work.
If you were going to do it for everybody in the corridor, that's easier than going through the detailed determination like that.
But what is that going to do if if somebody gets a notice, they may or may not really be affected, and they're going to be freaking out if you did it for all the green. That's a lot.
Can I ask just a outside the box question? And sometimes I've learned a long time ago, I call it the big circle. Got an idea and all this, and say up front, well, here's what we need to do, but then we got to go and research and do all this, spend time and effort and lots of people, and we end up coming back around to the same solution. I think what drives this, the Planning Commission, citizens, staff, is the concern to make sure that we protect the view shed. Is there another way to attack this rather than try to craft an ordinance that we really don't know what the ultimate, this may be something where if we pass this ordinance 2 years from now, future council may be pulling their hair out and staff, and we've got to retract it. Is there because of unintended consequences, is there a way maybe through just the process with staff when they're looking at a platting process, and have some in their arsenal of tools when they're working together with an applicant that would identify the view shed issues and work to, just like right now, if somebody wants to build a home on their lot and there's trees there, the arborist gets involved and the house has to move or whatever. Is there a simpler way that staff could look at it and say, okay, well, this affects the view shed, and for this and that, need to kind of work with it a little bit here or there, rather than having an ordinance. And I'm just, it may not be realistic, but just basically, what I'm saying is use some common sense. If this home's placed here, it's going to make the view shed look worse. Versus if you do this, we're trying to find the best place on the lot that not only satisfies the homeowner but also view shed. So I'm just throwing that out there. Matt.
Ken, I think you and I talked about an idea a while back. Some communities have design guides that aren't necessarily ordinances, but they allow for developers to have some kind of an idea for what the community is looking for.
Right.
Is that right?
That's true.
And I think that we've got, and I understand where we're going. I think this is a logical direction of where we are based on some of the past decisions that we've made, but that doesn't necessarily make it right. I think I agree with Karen's comments that we might be running to a over-regulation situation here. I think it's well intended, but I haven't personally had anybody complain to me about where houses sit on lots. What they have a complaint of is the fact that some of the contiguous land has been disappearing. As we're heading down this path, I just get concerned that we may be fixing a problem that I haven't heard that is there, other than the fact that we might be regulating our way to achieve an objective that will usurp on individual landowner property rights, especially if we don't communicate with them. I think we're doing a disservice to that aspect of our constituency. But it might be a question of whether this information, this process, and this work that we've done might fit better with a design guide that our staff could create. And to my knowledge, I know we obviously have our comprehensive plan, but when it comes to building structures, things of that nature, am I correct, Ken, in thinking that this could be a place where that could fit as an alternative to it being an ordinance?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Obviously, protection of the viewshed is the key here, and that can be done by way of aspirational aesthetic concerns in a design guidebook. The only issue is, though, is the difference between recommendations and the force of law.
Right.
And that's the difference. So it's, you know, it's all well and good until the rubber hits the road and someone says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to move it back. Or I'm not going to do this. And that's when it's the difference between, because the only thing that you're asking me to do that compels me to do this is a aspirational design book, and I'm with you, and that sounds great, but it's taking up too much of this, or I'm going to have to gut trees to do that, or it's going to make we could go on and on. My only point is, yes, but at some point the way governments compel folks to carry out their vision is by law.
And if we treated a design guide as a basis of communication,
yes,
is how it would be treated anyway.
That's right.
So as a staff, then if we said this is kind of what the council would love to see, however, it is not a requirement by law.
That's
but
right.
But it is an issue in which in my 5 years on this council, I haven't had anybody come before me about where a house sits as an issue.
Well, I mean, you may have a lot of people that will voluntarily comply with that. I mean, my experience in Milton is a lot of the folks share the same common bucolic interest in Milton staying, looking in a particular way. But my only point is, though, is it's the tough cases where all of a sudden you get pushed back and this is not my vision for my own piece of property and I have property rights.
And that's an element of risk that we would have to decide here as a council, and past experience, I'm not sure that's necessarily a risk that's overburdensome from what I've seen. So although it may happen, you're right on that one particular case, but I think I agree with the mayor and Bill and Karen. There are some issues here that we might be overstepping our bounds.
Anybody else? Bert?
So there are two components to this ordinance, steep slopes and ridge lines.
That's correct.
What seems to me the one that's causing the most difficulty is the ridge line component of it.
That is definitely the one we went back to Planning Commission to have some additional discussion on.
And that's what these green areas are ridge line
Yes, sir.
related issues. So we could always do like many of our neighboring, if not all of our neighboring communities, and have some sort of steep slope ordinance, whether that be 25, 35, whatever percent.
That's correct.
And then maybe, I hate to drop it, but maybe drop the ridge line component out of it, and at least have some protection on some of those steep slopes, whatever we determine those are.
That
So
is
that's
a
an option
possibility.
as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
So at least we get something out of it.
Bill?
Question on your green slide here. What slope grade were you using to determine those areas?
So in this particular case, it's only identifying the ridgeline areas. So it's using the criteria of 50 feet higher than the adjacent road and within the 500-foot corridor. If you wanted to look at slopes, now this will be a little bit difficult, and I will say that this was just based strictly on the percentage criteria and not necessarily on the criteria of whether or not it's 10 feet high and 5,000 contiguous square feet. But this would give you an idea of those slopes throughout the city that are more than 25% and which slopes are more than 35%. So all of the little red areas that are in some cases very difficult to see. That distribution basically breaks down like this. There's 1,130 acres of 25% or greater and 313 acres of 35% or greater. But keep in mind, where you have slopes less than 10 feet tall, this is going to take into account every slope greater than that percentage. Our ordinance takes into account those slopes that are greater than 10 feet tall and more than 5,000 contiguous square feet. So that may take some of those out. This also takes out slopes that exist within currently subdivided developments. So an existing subdivision would not be represented here because it's already developed and platted under previous regulations. But that should give you at least some idea of the distribution of these types of slopes and where we would be looking at them throughout the city.
Okay. Bert?
So I mean, looking at it like that, the slope component of this is, although you saw the numbers of 1,100 or whatever it was in 300 acres, is not a huge component of this. It's not that far-reaching as far as the number of areas of large blobs of red in the middle of somewhere. Obviously, you got some along the creeks there and everything like that, but this, again, I guess it goes to my point that the slope component is a much less a factor than the ridgeline component.
And it's going to look more at the way you subdivide a property versus a traditional 1 acre lot where you would just go in and subdivide it by 1 acre. It's going to force you to look at those steep slopes areas and where you have a predominant number of steep slopes on a particular piece of property. It may require you to do larger lots within that subdivision, and you're going to have to find a building envelope, the way the ordinance is currently written, of 25% or less in order to build. While it's not an absolute prohibition of development on those slopes, it does regulate them in some way and allows staff to look at the layout of a subdivision to make sure that those lots are placed in the most appropriate place on the property. When you throw in the ridgeline component, it does add an additional layer of regulation and a little bit of complexity to it that staff will have to work through with applicants also.
And aren't there, and maybe you may or may not be able to answer this, and I don't know if it's this way in Fulton County, but I know in some of our neighboring counties, just somewhat of a comparison, it may or may not be apples to apples, but taking into percolability of soil, sometimes if you have less, you need more space. Your lots have to be different sizes to have a functioning, get a permit for a septic system in some places. So it's a similar
right.
kind of thought process.
Right, probably less
Different
frequent
reasons, different reasons, but
right.
similar. So this isn't that unheard of, and most of our neighboring communities, and Fulton County does too, has some sort of steep slope ordinance. It's just a difference of their percentages.
Right, and I may have that here. Fulton County's is a little bit different in that it regulates 33 to 40% slopes, requiring you to do a site plan. So it doesn't necessarily say you can't build on them, but it requires you to do an engineered site plan on those properties. And then it does prohibit development on those slopes that are 40% or greater.
Mm-hmm. And ours doesn't, the way it's written, whatever the percentage, doesn't prohibit development.
Right.
It makes it directed.
Right. So as long as you can find a building envelope, it may require you to increase your lot size to compensate for steeper slopes on that lot. But as long as you can find a building envelope of 25% or less.
Within normal setbacks and all that kind of
Correct,
stuff.
correct. So all the standard setbacks of the zoning ordinance would still apply to all of those
So
lots.
in that case, in a perfect world with a steep slope ordinance, the worst it would do for the city, the public as a whole, is potentially create larger lots.
Or change position.
Off the top of my head, I would say yes, that's true.
Well, your house would still be in the same position within those setbacks. Taking out the ridgeline
Right.
component, just the steep slope.
Provided you could find that buildable envelope.
But okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And I guess I'm leaning more towards not putting the ridgeline thing in there because I think again, I haven't heard people come forward say that this was a big issue in the past. Plus, it sounds like we may run into complexity that we can't foresee what the impact's going to be. As far as the steep slope, I guess I'm okay with doing a steep slope ordinance. I think 25 is a little bit too extreme to say 25% is the limit. I think when you reviewed last time, I think the average we saw with kind of in our same geographic area, wasn't it, in the 30s, like 33, 35?
You know,
with other
it varied.
municipalities around us.
I think for those that have adopted the model ordinance, 25% was not an uncommon number. I think most of those represented the model ordinance. Calhoun was very similar, if not exactly the same as Fulton County. Canton is basically the model ordinance, but they moved theirs to 35.
Can I make a comment on that, Carter? Because I think, excuse me, Rick, but I think that's what we have to realize too. You know, even within Fulton County, the topography is totally different from South Fulton as is in North Fulton. One of those, I think at 25, was it Jackson County?
I think that's right.
You know, that's a fairly flat county, so it totally affects things different than it would be in North Fulton where things are rolling. So, you know, I think that's the key we got to look at to compare apples to apples. What's a similar geographic or, you know, the geography, just like, what was the one you just said, Calhoun or whatever. That's a little bit more rolling hills, you know, maybe even more hilly than Milton, so, and they're up. So, you know, I tend to agree with what I'm hearing from the council that, you know, if we were talking about the slopes, and there was a good point brought up about, you know, if something's already divided or existing homes, you know, they're not going to have to follow the same rules that the property owners have that are left out there. But I certainly, you know, could see for some protection, maybe having it in 30-35% range, and you know, enact the steep slopes ordinance, but maybe try to gear it towards more of what you see some similar type areas are in geography. So, right.
And I guess if you go around the metro area, not just even, I think we have more hilly topography in Milton than we do Alpharetta, but if you go over towards Marietta, that direction, you see homes built. If you eliminated the ability to build, if it had to be on 25% or less, I think without knowing really the impact, I think that's where we could start to really limit people as far as ability to build on them. I see nice homes, and I think they're built on, I think Bill had even said on his property, he's got more than 25% slope even on his property to where his home is built. I just think 25 is a bit restrictive.
Bill, and then Karen, did you? Okay,
Maybe further to your point there too, Joe, with Fulton County and in their slope greater than 33%. I'd like to see a line going across the state of Georgia from west to east, and where the Piedmont starts to die into the coastal plain there. So, to your point, the southern section of Fulton County is a lot flatter. You're getting closer to the coastal plain there. You don't have the rolling Piedmont that you do up in the northern part of the county. So to use, you know, I appreciate the comparison with the different jurisdictions here, but I don't think one size fits all. Look at Fulton County, it's what, 70 miles long from the northern part up here in Milton down to Campbell County or Chattahoochee Hills. I think we need to be looking at a percentage that's unique or pretty close to unique to the slopes that are up in this area of the state. I think 25% is too flat. I think you get up around 33 to 35%. It's probably more indicative of the topography up in this part of the country.
Anybody else care?
I don't have a problem with it being 25% as long as there is an administrative way to get a variance without having to go through the whole BZA. I mean, if you look at what we're really trying to do here, we're trying to protect our steep slopes. And, you know, you can see from the map, if we go down to 33%, there's not many steep slopes, so we've really spent a whole lot of time talking about something that probably isn't gonna apply to 1 or 2 lots over the next 10 years. Like I said, I don't mind sticking with the 25%, sticking with the ridge line wording, as long as there is a way that we can have an administrative variance. Because I think staff understands what we're trying to accomplish here. And sometimes when we try to put everything in little bitty boxes, we may find out that the box we put it in really does it more harm than it, and we don't get the consequences we intended to have. So I don't mind sticking with the way it is now, as long as there's a way to have a variance.
Hodge, are you sure you want to step up for BZA? Bert?
Well, I mean, I would prefer to leave it as it is with the ridge line in there, but I also understand that it may or may not be reality that can happen. And if that could happen, I think that would be great. I too prefer the 25%, but I would rather have something on the books if it has to have a 3 in front of it, 30, 33%. Then I could acquiesce to that versus just canning the whole thing for 25%. I mean, you think of it in the grand scheme of things, 25%, 25 feet and 100, or 33 feet and 100. Is it really that big a difference? Reality, no. But if that ridge line portion of it, while I know it's important, I just see it, as much as I'd like to keep it in there, just being so much of a moving target that it would be really hard to do any type of administrative variance. But I may be wrong, and if I am, that's great.
Okay. When I'm hearing through this discussion and, wondering if, and again, everybody's not totally on the same page, but, again, I have a hard time just arbitrarily saying 25% based on other areas if you're not really comparing the exact same topography. So, the best I could come up with when I was looking through different scenarios is probably with our topography of Milton, is maybe something in the 30, whether it's 33%, maybe more reasonable. If the ridgeline thing, if sounds like that the council may be okay with not doing that. So, I'm going to open it up to that. Matt, welcome. And then Bill.
Yeah, I think that I think 25% would be too much, too restrictive on that end. I do think that there's been a lot of work that's been done into this. If we are going to go in this way, something gradual might be more appropriate. Again, I haven't seen complaints as far as slopes or ridge lines and anything like that, but I don't discredit the work that's been done on this idea that came from staff. So it might be something that we just want to, if we do it, I can see a 33% and get behind that as well.
Bill?
I'm trying to, okay, it's in, excuse me, Article O, Building Requirements and Guidelines, and in O.3, and it's in the last 3 sentences, I guess. Roof forms and roof lines for new structures should be broken into a series of smaller building components to reflect the irregular forms of the surrounding hillside. Long, linear, unbroken roof lines are discouraged. Flat roofs are discouraged. The slope angle of roof pitch should be at or below the angle of the natural hillside slope. So you could end up with maybe not a flat roof, but something like a 3 and 12, which is kind of a warehouse slope, like a pre-engineered metal building, 2 to 4 to 12 slopes. So I'm not sure that here again we're trying to use something that one size fits all, but I think that slope in particular is not reasonable. I don't know how many different slope roofs there are around town, but I would venture to guess that most of them are in the 4 to 6, 12 slopes. It's, I think we're getting too deep into building design there, and it's I'm not sure that it has any redeeming value.
Well, there was some discussion with the Planning Commission on deletion of that particular portion of that section because it was more of a guidance section where they should or could be used, and it was really more of an intent to try and drive the lower right-hand corner where we're conforming the structure more to the slope and the ridge line that exists out there as an option. You know, you still have other options of screening, but it was one way by which you could provide some sort of screening and camouflage for a structure, but it wasn't a requirement of that ordinance.
One of the guidelines,
Right,
like we were
right.
talking about earlier.
There was also some discussion with the Planning Commission, and I think even at our work session, that there were further guidelines provided within the model ordinance that it would be possible for us to break out into a guidance document on the enforcement and regulation of this particular ordinance, both from the ridgeline perspective and the steep slopes perspective. When we've written these in other jurisdictions, we have done that type of document. It's basically an example document that goes through and says, you know, here's how we intend to enforce this particular ordinance.
So it's a companion document to what we're looking at here?
It's possible. So we slimmed this ordinance down from the model ordinance as best we could so that we had a more an easier administrative type document with the intent of taking those shoulds and coulds and mays out into a different type of document to help guide this type of development.
I think we're just trying to over-regulate.
Well, yep. Nobody else has any comments? Somebody want to make a motion?
I've just got one quick question. So is it easy, is this easy to break out if we wanted to, the ridge line? Or is
It is, I think. I think the ridgeline components are relatively, are all pretty much together.
And then we could still try to help with some guidelines, even though they may be laughed at. But at least it gets us something in the book.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? Or I'll open up for a motion.
I'll try to make a motion.
Okay.
I would like to make a motion to approve agenda item RZ 16-05, basically deleting the ridgeline portion and changing the slope to 33% from 25%.
Bill?
Friendly amendment. I'd be in favor of deleting Article 0.3 as regards to roofs and roof slopes.
Well, since you're a friend, I guess I can take that amendment. Is that appropriate?
If you are acknowledging and in agreement with the amendment, that's fine. Second needs to as well.
Second. Yes.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion from Councilmember Hewitt with removing the ridgeline portion, changing the steep slopes from 25% to 33%. And then what was the article that?
0.3.
0.3, deleting that one.
Okay, so I have that motion. Now, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a second from Councilmember Morag. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimous.
Thank you.
All right, Sudie, if we can move on to unfinished business.
This item is consideration of an ordinance of the City of Milton, Georgia, to revise the city's procurement policy with respect to engineering and design-related services in federally funded road construction projects, to provide for the repeal of conflicting ordinances, to provide an effective date, and for other lawful purposes. Agenda item number 17052, first presentation was at the February 22nd council meeting. Mr. Ken Gerard.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you very much. This is a piece of unfinished business with respect to a proposed modification of the City of Milton procurement policies. As the council may be aware, the City of Milton is a local designated entity that can in fact implement programs, transportation projects and programs that are funded with federal aid highway programming dollars. However, to retain our certification, there are certain requirements under the Code of Federal Regulations that both GDOT is going to anticipate as well as the federal government will require if we are to retain our local certification standard. And this one is, as Ms. Gordon mentioned, a modification to our procurement policies with respect to engineering and design-related services. In other words, how do we retain those services with respect to these federal aid projects? And so if you look into your packet, you're going to find an ordinance, which is the operative document that you will be adopting this evening should you choose to do so. And then behind that, you're going to see the actual technical modifications to our procurement rules. And so first of all, let me just get to the nuts and bolts of it. What exactly are we covering by these very narrowly tailored procurement specifications? We're talking about how we procure with respect to project involving federal aid dollars, engineering and design related services. And if you look in your packet on page 1, this is not the ordinance but the actual nuts and bolts of the policy as well. It means professional services of an architectural or engineering nature or incidental services that members of the architectural and engineering professions may logically or justifiably perform, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is a very niche, tailored modification, and candidly, and just to get to the end, if we intend to continue to be certified to locally administer these federally funded transportation projects, we must approve this. If you look through it and if you read through it, it's an interesting read, but basically the expectation is that this sort of procurement is not unlike what we do now with some fairly significant modifications. First of all, it basically anticipates an RFP sort of process, and then the qualifications with respect to the RFP are set forth within the body of the documents. Interestingly, at least with respect to the initial qualification system, cost is not an issue. It's supposed to be all qualification based, and so these vendors will then come in and they will provide their various qualifications typically on a project by project basis, although it can be more of a generalized basis for us to sort of keep these contractors sort of in a holding period, but it also can be on a project by project basis. If you'll note on page 2, one of the key requirements is whether the contractor has been barred from work on federal projects. Not unsurprisingly, the federal government wants to make sure that if they've been barred from federal projects, we're not receiving solicitations of them to work on, in fact, federal projects. Then once we get all of this information in, there is supposed to be basically a rating of the various vendors that come in, 1 through 5, 1 through 3, whatever. And then that's followed up by actual interviews, and they can be either telephonic or in-person interviews of the candidates, the vendors, if you will, for these design and engineering services. And then after those interviews, we then do a final culling of the group that we've received, and we narrow it down to no less than the final 3. And then, of course, if we've narrowed it down to the final 3, that also means we probably have number 1. And then with respect to number 1, that's who we then commence the actual price negotiation with. So I'll defer to Carter if he has any additional thoughts on this, but I will tell you that this is very much consistent with what the Code of Federal Regulations requires. It's what GDOT demands. My respectful recommendation to you that we adopt it.
Okay, Carter, did you add anything on that?
I don't think there's anything I could add to that.
Okay, Matt, and then Bill.
So, in these processes, obviously, we work with them to achieve construction objectives that we might have, but how much are we beholden to their design for our roads rather than our wishes for the design for our roads?
Right, so this only deals with federally funded projects.
Right.
So for projects that you might be familiar with, it would have applied to the roundabout at State Route 372. It applies to the Heritage Walk project currently going on in the Crabapple area, and it would have applied to the Mayfield Road sidewalk. So in those cases where we are using federal dollars, we are not unlike all of our projects. There are national standard design guidelines that we go by. But in the case of Heritage Walk, they worked very well with us in trying to develop a typical section that was more crabapple-like than
Not
what
typical.
a standard GDOT road would be like. So, I think they tend to work with the communities these days within their ability to.
Right.
Okay. Bill?
So, how do we enter into, or what's our part in this contractual relationship then? You have the design and engineering portion of it that's actually contracted by GDOT, is it not? And
Nope.
if so, how do we enter into that decision, or what's our responsibility or
No,
options?
that's a great question, and if I was not clear on that, that is totally my fault. No, we would be the contracting party. So this is simply the how, but as far as who is going to be in contractual privity or the contractual relationship with the vendor, this is the how we get there, but it'll be the City of Milton. Yes,
So,
sir.
we enter into a GDOT through a PFA or Project Framework Agreement, the responsibilities of each of the parties. We're currently certified to handle a project through right-of-way acquisition. So with all of our projects, we've done the design, we've done the right-of-way acquisition, and then we've turned it back over to GDOT to handle the construction components of it.
Got it.
Very standard.
All right. Anybody else? If not, you have a motion?
Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve agenda item number 17-052.
Second motion.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Coons, second by Councilmember Thurman, I believe. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimous. Okay, Sudi, if you'd please move on to new business, if you'll call that item.
This item is consideration of the following subdivision plat: Tanglewood Preserve, Phase 2, land lots 465 and 466, Chinnery Drive. Final plat, creating 14 lots, 25.32 total acres, 0.56 lots per acre. Agenda item number 17070, Miss Melissa Brannon.
Good evening. Okay, Okay, so the topic tonight is Tanglewood Phase 2. This is just north of the Phase 1 where the entrance is off Thompson Road. You can sort of see on this slide the index map shows the lot layout of the 14 lots that we're talking about tonight. The topo on this one is not too steep. It starts off as pasture land up front and then sort of transitions into gently rolling hills throughout the development. It's all public streets on this one. They did a good job of laying them out and running them along the ridges. So there's also a lot of streams on this, but they did another good job with the layout of the lots to where the buffers are created really in the backyards of all of the lots. So some of the lots, maybe as you see in this one, in lots 18 or 19 and 20 and 18 in this one, might be limiting a little bit to possibly having a pool in the backyard, but there's really not a lot of topo on this one, so we're not expecting really any retaining walls even. So, and it ends in the cul-de-sac there. And so all of the common areas, the mail kiosk and all of that's in Phase 1 of this development. So any questions at this time?
Questions? This is practically averaging about 2 acres per lot, almost.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right on this one.
Bill?
So these lots don't extend down to Hamby Road then, do they?
No, the developer does own those lots, but those lots are mostly in the floodplain,
Right.
so we don't expect much development. He might be able to come back in and put a couple off of Hamby, but they won't connect to this phase.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay.
All right, I'll open up for either motion or if there's any other discussion.
Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve agenda item number 17-070 for the subdivision plat.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion for approval. Councilmember Thurman, seconded by Councilmember Morick. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Okay. We'll move on to reports. Anything the council wants to report on? I would just say this, kind of final preparations and walking through the new city hall, just, and certainly there'll be time later, but just want to thank the entire team and staff and the architects, contractors, council. I'm excited for our citizens to see it. It's going to be a wow moment. And as I said earlier, it's not wow because it's ultra fancy. It's just it's got a great feel, and I think everybody I think everyone will enjoy working there, and I think our citizens will enjoy it. And it's kind of interesting. We've given a couple of tours to some other cities that are thinking about it, and they're all coming back just blown away after touring some of the other city halls. So anyway, so I'm just kind of initially throwing out a big thanks to everybody involved. It's certainly makes me proud. I'll move on to staff.
Well, I was going to lead with City Hall, but that's been the topic of discussion for tonight. This is our last council meeting here tonight. We'll be moving to our new city council chambers next week. We are wrapping up some
And
of
let me say this, Carter, and for you in the audience, these screens won't be in the way, and I won't have to look around and see if so-and-so's trying to say something. Raise their hand.
Right, totally different level of technology at the new facility. I think it'll be a big improvement from where we've been. We are finishing up some of the punch list items this week. A few of us are working in the facility this week from an operational standpoint, just to make sure everything's ready for next week. But looks like we will be. It'll be a great facility. I think you all will be very happy with it. I think the entire community will be very happy with it. The road out front, Heritage Walk, is currently under construction, as you've seen. It's moving forward. They're working to complete that piece in front of City Hall here in the next couple of months. So from Itasca over to Lacoma. So that is moving forward, and weather permitted, that should be on schedule.
So Carter, to get to the meeting next week, is it going to be the way going through the subdivision, going the back round?
Right, so we are doing some signage along the main routes to try and help folks get there. Since Heritage Walk does not exist, you can get there either down McFarland or down Itasca into the back side of the parking lot. And there will be some road signage out there to help assist with that. So if anybody has any problems, please let us know, and we'll try and supplement that signage to the best extent that we can. So a couple other projects that we have in process. The sidewalks on Mayfield Road, we're wrapping up our right-of-way certification on that. Final construction plans are being certified by GDOT concurrent with that, so hopefully when the right-of-way authorization comes back, we'll be able to move right into our construction documents. Again, we're going to bid that in conjunction with some sidewalk work to be done by the city of Alpharetta. So our project will go from the main intersection in Crabapple down to Charlotte. Alpharetta is going to look at picking it up from Charlotte down to
Danbury Park.
Thank you. So that's moving forward. Landscaping at the Hopewell Birmingham Roundabout. If you haven't seen it, we're working on our new plan for landscaping our roundabouts. That landscaping will include the center island as well as the corner of the Hopewell House. So over the past few months, we've been approving new contracts for services for our public works contractors, and one of them was facilities maintenance to try and improve all of our maintenance and landscaping at our facilities. The first step of that was to improve the signage for the birdhouse as well as kind of coordinate the landscaping with the roundabout itself. And as we go along, that landscaping will move up through the birdhouse, and hopefully that facility will look like what it should look like over the next year or so. The roundabout at Freemanville and Providence is one that's currently under design. A little bit earlier in this process than normal, we've moved that design into a peer review. With all of our roundabout designs, we do an independent peer review with a third-party consultant who is recognized as a national expert by GDOT, just to confirm all the intricacies of the design components of that. Given where we came out of with that design in the concept stage, we wanted to move that into a peer review a little bit earlier, and you've seen that contract at some of our previous meetings. So right now we're in the midst of that peer review to see if there's any modifications or tweaks that we need to make to that design before we move into final design and right-of-way acquisition. So we should be moving towards that within the next 45 to 60 days, I would guess. Turn lanes at Red and Hopewell. We're adding left turn lanes or right turn lanes, depending on which way you want to look at it, on Red going on to Hopewell. Currently in right-of-way and easement acquisition on that, and we're going to incorporate that, as we did with the Webb and Deerfield work we did last year, into our paving contract. We thought that worked well, and we got good pricing on that. So when we put our paving contract out this year, those improvements will be included in that. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions, Karen?
Do we have an update on the Birmingham Highway Batesville Road intersection? I know GDOT was looking at that, but I mean, it backs.
Yes.
It backs up south of the roundabout.
Yes. So they did do a look at that intersection. There were some zonings, some very large zonings going on in Cherokee County that they felt like they needed to go back and include those in their evaluations and take a bigger look at what was going on. And so what was happening in their initial look at it was the models they were running weren't necessarily representing the conditions that they knew were happening out there. So they are stepping back to take a little bit bigger picture of the traffic flow in that area to see if they can get their models to match more closely with what they know existing conditions to be, so they can come up with the right solution for that intersection.
So they are still working on that?
So they are still working on it.
Okay. Thank you, Carter.
You're welcome.
Next fire, and you know, before Chief Edgar speaks, I want to just put out a plug. One of our citizens, whose stage name is Cadillac Jack, unfortunately had a heart attack, and I guess what they call a widowmaker, and very slim, 1 in 10 chance you survive or whatever. And I was visiting with him and his wife, and they were just going on and on about, the response time within 4 minutes of the time that he, unfortunately for him, they waited and waited to call, as some men do, oh, I'm okay, and let me go here and all that. But by the time they did call, 4 minutes, and then they were just showing how, the equipment that we have, and how immediately the hospital, the doctors are reading his EKGs and all that. And he said then he knew it was serious when he heard in the background on the radio the hospital saying, ETA, when are you going to be here and whatnot. But anyways, very complimentary. You guys saved his life, and so just thank you.
Well, thank you to that, Mayor. He actually came by the fire station the other last week and met with the guys and said thank you as well. And it goes to the technology that we have in the fire department, where we can actually send a cardiac strip, or what we're seeing on the monitor, directly to the hospital. So it really cuts down on time, and they can get them right in and don't have to wait for these evaluations on the ER side. So the system worked the way it was supposed to. So very good. Couple quick things. On last Friday, you may have seen our firefighters out on the street corners. We kicked off our MDA boot drive for 2017, and after one day, they've collected over $13,000. So we are on target for another great year. The other thing is, a few months ago, we were here and we talked about the POD program and the strategic national stockpile. Well, we completed the training on that program, and that was to help us be prepared for a public health emergency and how to manage that strategic stockpile. In the event that anything occurs, we are a distribution point for North Fulton in the city of Milton. So our next step is to create the operational plan for that, which then will be incorporated into our emergency operation plan. So you'll see more and more of that coming out, but I wanted to let you know that we are moving forward with that program. And the last thing I have is that we're going to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary for the fire department here in the end of April. And I have learned that we're losing 4 of our senior folks that started the fire department to retirement. So I guess that's a good thing and a bad thing. Some of our experience is going out the door, but good for them that they get to enjoy their retirement. So just a heads up, we're going to see some of that, and I think maybe a few more during the year as the year progresses. But that's all I had. If you have any questions.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
All right, Courtney?
Hi, everybody. Everybody's taller than me. Bring this back down. So I want to talk about tonight some of the accomplishments and goals and things that Wayne Boston, our community builder in my department, is working on. As you know, he works with Better Together, which is a group of volunteers that you see them at all of our events, almost everything that we do. And one of the ways that he recruits people for that are when people request to be a volunteer online. They're directed to Better Together to attend some of those monthly meetings, to join that pool of volunteers, which is a wealth of skill, experience, and resources here in Milton, as you can imagine. Something that has grown out of that pool of volunteers, is a way to connect nonprofits and their needs in Milton to those volunteers and their skills. So Shannon has helped put that online. Nonprofits can register online, list their needs, and we're in the works of connecting those with volunteers who sign up as well. And Wayne's been a big part of that. Another way that Wayne has connected nonprofits and the needs of places in Milton to the volunteers is, one example of that is in person. Richard Owens, who I know you all know, the landscape architect, went with Wayne out to Special Equestrians of Georgia to see they have some issues with some runoff, some other problems. As a nonprofit, they sort of work on a bare bones budget. And Richard, with his, again, vast experience and knowledge, offered them a lot of recommendations that they're going to follow up on as they can. Wayne also connects new residents of Milton with every new resident of Milton gets a welcome packet with a list of things that they can do with the city of Milton, programs offered, schedules they may need, resources they might need. Every single resident that moves in gets that packet, and Wayne wants to follow that up with a phone call. We're working on how to do that, how to make that even better, a better welcome to Milton. He hosts business connection events, showcasing local businesses, connecting them with customers and residents in the community, getting them involved, and that works both ways. The citizens get involved with the business gets involved with the citizens. Most recently, the Milton Literary Group was started by Wayne, and they started the Milton Literary Festival, which has, for 2 years, has brought together quite a few authors. This past year, 30 local authors came together with over 100 readers to come to Milton, and I hope that continues to grow. One of the things that Wayne is proudest of, and me as well, is Village Volunteers. This group, which you're going to hear more about in the coming weeks, Wayne and Diane Stewart. Diane has 2 disabled sons, lives in Milton, and is very active in a lot of our events, MDAC, my events, and, of course, Better Together. But she came to Wayne with when her kids graduated from high school, their special needs programming ended with school. And so she, along with other volunteers, have started the Village Volunteers. They meet at the Bethel Center at noon on Mondays. And any given Monday, you can find about 30 people there, the participants, their caregivers, and then especially the volunteers. And Wayne, who's pretending he's retired this week and is in Charleston playing golf, he too would argue that this program benefits not just the participants, but the volunteers who meet those participants, get to know them, work with them, and make them feel a sense of belonging and inclusion in Milton, which is what our department does. To close, I want to say how invaluable Wayne's own experience. He's a vital resource to the city as our employee. Thank y'all.
I thank you, Courtney, and I just, not necessarily to isolate on individuals, because not only what you and staff have done and all the other volunteers and the committee members, but, I totally agree. Wayne, to me, is just amazing. See him involved, every day out at every event, doing all the things you're talking about. He's in the office here all the time. So what an asset to our community. So we need to all make sure that we thank him when we get a chance. So.
Thanks.
All right. If we don't have any other reports, I'll open up for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll move to adjourn the last meeting of City Council at 13,000 Deerfield Parkway.
Well, I think I had a motion from Karen, but how about,
That's
will
okay.
will you call that the second? You
I'll
just add
call
it?
that the second.
All right.
Friendly
So,
amendment.
all right. All right. Yep, it'll be exciting next Monday. So, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's